is being live streamed, but it's
on Facebook.
okay. Whenever one of those notifications comes up, my screen freezes, just so you know.
Oh, all right. I should be done. I've done recording and live streaming. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Teresa Holt. I'm the State Director for AARP Alaska. AARP is a nonprofit membership organization with a social mission. We have 38 million members nationally and about 77,000 members here in Alaska. Our goal is to empower people to choose how they want to live as they age. And we do that by providing information, education, advocacy, and community service. So I'm now going to pass it over to Nadine to introduce our speaker.
Well, good morning and welcome. Steve Brown is a professor at the Cooperative Extension Service. He is the agricultural and horticultural agent for the Mat-Su and Copper River districts. His areas of expertise are agriculture and geography. Stephen Brown's areas of interest include the twin geospatial technologies of the global positioning system and geographic information systems as they relate to agriculture and the environment. In his spare time, he's an avid mountaineer and marathon runner. Welcome, Stephen.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me. As is true with Zoom, we're having a little difficulty on my end, but we'll deal with that, and we'll go ahead and get started. And even though the slide on your screen says Fundamentals of Alaska Gardening, what it should really read is Fundamentals of Vegetable Gardening in Alaska.
So
and,
Steve, we are not seeing your screen now. We are seeing you.
Let me try this again.
Okay.
There, now it's coming up.
Okay. So anyway, as I was saying, this really should be Fundamentals of Alaska Vegetable Gardening. And a lot of people say, oh my gosh, you're growing vegetables in Alaska. You must be really, really smart and have a great green thumb. Well, the truth is one of the easiest places to grow veggies is in Alaska because we have so few diseases and things in insects. And so if you just learn a few tricks that we're going to show you here, you can be a very successful vegetable gardener in Alaska. And again, I'm having the problem. I can't. There we go. So anyway, why a home garden in Alaska? Well, first off, right now with the way inflation is, it saves money. Before our current inflationary period, we used to say that a typical home garden would save you about $500 a year, but we're thinking that's going to be more along the lines of $1,000. And that may not seem like a lot of money, but these days an extra $1,000 in your pocket is a really handy thing to have. The other thing that a home garden does is it encourages people to eat more healthily. Depending upon where you're at in Alaska, the availability of fresh veggies can be very expensive and very hard to come by. And I know for me personally, I'm not a big broccoli or cauliflower fan, but if I grew it, I'm going to eat it when otherwise I wouldn't. Also, it's a very pleasant hobby. It's a great thing that the whole family can do together. And it's inexpensive. So to begin with, the place where you start with your veggie garden is to plan it out. Okay. You know, you wouldn't build a house without a plan, and you shouldn't garden without one either. So what you want is a garden that looks like this well-planned limousine instead of what I call the Alaska limousine, where you just patch things together. Just like we tell people you shouldn't go to the grocery store on an empty stomach, you shouldn't go to a garden catalog or a garden store without a plan, because you're going to buy everything you see in sight and end up with probably a bit of a dysfunctional garden. So we encourage people to try growing about a 20 by 50 garden. It'll supply a family of 4. Plan for the veggies that you like the best. If you don't like cauliflower, don't grow cauliflower. Try to plant things that are going to supply you through the year. Those are going to be things like potatoes and carrots that you can put in cold storage. I know right now, my wife and I grew enough potatoes and carrots last summer that we are just now running out of them for this year. And here in another couple of weeks, we'll be replanting. Something to consider too is plan some for your neighbors or for the local food pantry. You know, a lot of people these days, they don't know who their neighbors are. Well, if you have a bucket full of potatoes or carrots that you can take over to a neighbor you've never met before, that's a great way to open the door to meet your neighbors. And also too, with food pantries, they are very appreciative of people that donate fresh veggies. And the last thing is I encourage people to keep notes of what worked and what did not work for them. Garden diaries are very important. I love it when people have a problem with their garden and they bring me a diary of what they've done over the years, and that can help me pinpoint exactly what's going on with their garden. Okay, it's not allowing me to advance. There we go. So more on planning your garden, try getting some graph paper and make a scale drawing of your garden. Ideally, you'll want to run your rows north and south. Those north and south rows will warm more quickly than rows that run east to west. I don't have a photograph to show you this right now, but I've got a raised bed garden in my backyard. One of them runs east to west and the other runs north to south. There is still unmelted snow on the rows that run east to north or east to west, but the snow has been melted for over a week on the raised bed garden that runs north to south. So if you do the north to south in a raised bed, plant the tall plants in the north side of your garden so that as the sun rotates around the horizon during the day, they'll get the full benefit of the sun, and the short plants will get the full benefit of the sun if they're placed in the south. Obviously, you want as much southern exposure as you can. If you're new to Alaska, you'll want to map out where the shadows are because they will change between spring and fall. So you want to be able to take full advantage of as much sunlight as possible. So, you know, just make a map of where the shadows are. And also be aware that birch trees and spruce trees are coming after your garden because they want the water and the nutrients that you're going to be putting down. So try to, if you can, get at least 100 feet or more beyond your birch trees and your spruce trees. And that will also help reduce the amount of shadowing that you have. Depending upon where you're at in the state, wind can be a really big issue. Here in Palmer, I think we are one of the wind capitals of Alaska outside of the Aleutians. Wind can cause sandblasting and it can cause the plants to dry up. So anything you can do to protect your plants from prevailing winds, like planting them behind shelter belts or hills or buildings or fences, can really help. So not everything grows well in Alaska. That should be pretty obvious. So it's important that you choose your vegetable varieties wisely. The University of Alaska has a publication called Recommended Variety Lists. We have it for both South Central Alaska, Southeast Alaska, and Interior Alaska. The one for South Central Alaska there, if you just do a Google search for HGA-00031, our publication will come up. And from there, depending upon where you live in the state, you can find the recommended variety list for those areas as well. So it covers everything from strawberries to squash to even corn. Okay, in Alaska, some of the things that people most like to grow don't want to grow here. Examples of that would be tomatoes and peppers in particular. So what you've got to do is to fool those plants into thinking they're somewhere further south. And that's generally done with greenhouses and hoop houses. Hoop houses are also known as high tunnels. These allow you to extend the season and create warmer temperatures for those warmth-loving plants. What Alaska is known for are our cool weather crops, leafy crops like lettuce and spinach, broccoli, kale, cauliflower. Those are all things that do well here because they do well in cool weather. Just know that as much as we like to brag about our long days in Alaska, long days can cause some of those varieties to do what's called bolting. That's where they go to seed because they've had too much sun and too much warmth. When they bolt, they're still edible. They just don't taste very good because all the sugars in the leaves have gone to the production of seeds. Again, more on wind. Wind breaks can be critical in Alaska, one, because of wind, but also because of the flow of cold air. Cold air in the darker parts of the evening will flow downhill. So if you can put a windbreak upslope of your garden to divert the cold air away from your garden, that will really help your garden do very well. And there's something called the law of tens. And what that is that every foot of vertical wind protection will protect 10 feet behind it horizontally. So if you have any kind of slope that you're growing on, put up a windbreak, one, to divert the wind, but two, to divert the cold air that will be flowing downhill at night. Okay, there are miniature greenhouses. These are called cold frames and hotbeds. Here's a picture of what can be a cold frame or a hotbed. The difference between the two is a cold frame has no externals or no source of heating other than the sun itself, whereas a hotbed has some sort of artificial heating. Most commonly, the artificial heating that's used in a hotbed is horse manure. What you would do is you would open up this cold frame here and you would dig down about a foot, maybe 2 feet, and then you would fill that with fresh horse manure. Cow manure works well too. And then you might cover it with perhaps some straw or some burlap. And what happens is that manure is basically composting and breaking down, and a byproduct of that is heat. So you can actually heat a hotbed with a relatively small amount of manure that, if you have a source of manure, would probably cost you nothing, and you get a free source of heat. The other way to increase soil temperature in Alaska is with raised beds. If you look at the picture there on the lower left, there's a classic example of a raised bed. In this particular case, I've made it out of 2x6 or 2x10 boards, and then I filled it with topsoil. In Alaska, topsoil is something that's hard to come by. If you're on the road circuit, there's a lot of places that will sell bulk topsoil. You can buy it by the pickup load. It's relatively inexpensive compared to buying topsoil at your big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot. So if you just drive around on the road system, you'll see signs put up where people are selling topsoil. This is not really topsoil. Only Mother Nature can produce topsoil. But in Alaska, we have what I refer to as manufactured topsoil. And manufactured topsoil is about 1/3 sand, 1/3 peat, and 1/3 compost. And this is not as good as Mother Nature's topsoil, but it's a place to start. Other ways of heating the soil. Some people will use tires and put topsoil in that. In the middle photo, this person is growing potatoes. They started potatoes in the bottom tire, and as those potatoes began to sprout and grow, they would add another tire on top of that. And eventually they would have a column of potatoes growing there. The one thing to be concerned with is we don't know what kind of chemicals might come off those tires. So if you have any concerns about what those chemicals might do, don't use the tire system. I will say that it is a pretty common practice. And there on the far right, at the bottom of the screen, they're using a tire as sort of a miniature greenhouse. The plants aren't in contact with the tire, so there's no concern about what chemicals might be given off. But the tire is placed over the plants, and the tires absorb heat during the day and then give off that heat at night to keep the plants warm. This is actually how I grow tomatoes at my place. I grow tomatoes outside. Well, I start them inside my house with grow lights, but here in another couple of weeks, well, actually in about a month, when the last risk of frost, average risk of frost is gone for the year, I'll move my tomatoes outside and put a tire over them. In most years, they will do well enough that I can grow tomatoes outside in Alaska. Finally, there's another thing you can do to raise soil temperature, and that's something called mounding. If you are not in a situation where you can do a raised bed, mounding the soil is a great alternative to that. In this particular picture, they've mounded the soil about 10 to 12 inches high. And the mound itself is running north to south to take full advantage of our long days. And what happens is the morning sun will shine on the east side of the mound and heat it, and the afternoon sun will shine on the west side of the mound and heat it. And that will increase soil temperatures by about 3 to 4 degrees. In Alaska, what you're struggling for is just a few extra degrees, and those few extra degrees will make the difference between success or no success. Another thing you can do with mounding to increase the soil temperature even more is to cover the mounds in clear plastic. A lot of times people will say, well, wouldn't it be better to cover the mounds in black plastic? And intuitively, that seems true because the black plastic would absorb more heat from the sun. But in reality, clear plastic does a better job because clear plastic allows the sun to penetrate the soil by about 1 inch. So instead of heating up about a 4 mil piece of black plastic, you're actually heating up the top 1 inch of the soil. And so you'll get a lot more warming effect. The one thing about clear plastic, though, is weeds will still come up underneath the plastic. That's an irritation for most gardeners, but the weeds can usually be ignored because those weeds will not go to seed underneath the plastic. And for things like chickweed, the clear plastic will allow the seed bank to produce seeds, but because the plant itself can no longer produce seeds, you'll eventually run the seed bank out of seeds. And over the course of a couple of years, you'll be rid of things like chickweed. So if you're going to do the plastic over a mound, it's important that you run some sort of irrigation underneath the plastic. A drip hose works really well. Some people will, cut slits to move their transplants into the plastic. You can water through those slits, but that's a lot more labor. So if you have the ability to put down a drip hose under there, you'll be much more happier with it. And also, plants that are grown through plastic in mounds require significantly less water than plants that are grown without the plastic. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about testing the soil. Okay, soil testing is incredibly important. I always like to ask the question, do you want to grow lettuce like you see on the left, or, well, in this case, cabbage like you see on the right? The big difference is knowing what's in your fuel tank, how many nutrients, what's the level of nutrients that you have in your soil. And the only way to determine that is through soil testing. You can test the soil any time of the year as long as it's not frozen up. We recommend that you test in the fall at the end of the year so that we can get your fertilizer recommendation back to you over the winter, and so that you can be prepared for spring. But if you haven't done that, it's not too late. Once the soil is workable and not too soggy, you can go out and collect multiple samples from your garden. What we recommend you do is don't take a single soil sample. Get a bucket and collect 5 or 10 or 20 individual samples from across your garden. Put that all in a bucket, mix it up, and then you'll take about a 1 cup soil in a sample bag to submit to the lab. You can contact us here at the Cooperative Extension Service. We can make a soil lab recommendation. The lab that we most like to recommend is Brookside Laboratories in Ohio. Their soil test costs $19. Again, you can contact us here at the Cooperative Extension Service. If you just Google Alaska Cooperative Extension Service, you'll find our contact information, and we can give you more information on how to submit that soil sample. It's really important because you wouldn't go to the dentist and tell the dentist to just start drilling on your teeth until you find a problem. The same is true with your garden. With a soil test, it's like we have an x-ray of what's going on in your garden, and we can tell you exactly what to do to be an incredibly successful gardener. So when the soil test comes back, there's really 4 things that it tells us. When you get the soil test back from the laboratory, for you, it's just going to be a page full of numbers that probably won't mean anything unless you've had a soil science class in school. But you can send those results to us, and at no charge, we'll tell you what they mean in plain English. The most important thing that you'll need to know is what the pH is of your soil. Okay, the most important thing to fix in your soil is the pH. If your pH is not correct, you can add fertilizer all day long and it won't have its full effect. So the first thing we do is give you a lime recommendation on how to bring up the soil pH in your garden. The second thing that it tells us is what the nutrient levels are in your garden. In particular, it's going to be nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the 3 most important nutrients for your garden. And we can make you a custom fertilizer recommendation for that. So a little bit more on pH. pH stands for the potential of hydrogen. Most plants like a pH between 6.5 and 7.0. There are some plants in Alaska that like more acidic soil. Potatoes in particular like pHs in the 5s. Depending upon your particular situation, your potatoes may do best in a soil pHs of the upper 4H, of the upper 4s into the 5.5. And the reason for that is that helps prevent scab in potatoes. Also, there are some berry fruits like blueberries and strawberries like a more acidic situation. The important thing to know is it takes time to alter the pH. Generally, after you make a lime application, it's going to take about 6 months for it to reach its full effect. So that's another good reason to take your soil sample in the fall so that you can apply lime in the fall and have all the way to spring for it to reach its full effect. So again, Alaska soils tend to be very acidic. They almost always need lime. Alaska soils, even if you lime it, will continuously try to return to their acidic state. An alternative to lime is wood ash. Wood ash is also a good organic source of potassium. If you did not, if you took a soil sample, we can make a recommendation on how much wood ash to add. But if you don't know any better, we generally recommend about 1 gallon to 2 gallons of dry, clean wood ash per 100 square feet of your garden. That's going to increase the pH, and that's also going to increase your potassium levels. And if you're heating by wood, it's a free source of fertilizer. Okay, organic matter. Organic matter is very important to your garden. And generally, when we're speaking about organic matter, we're talking about compost. Good gardeners don't feed their plants. Good gardeners feed their soil, and that's through providing organic matter. Organic matter is produced by the breakdown of dead plants and dead bugs and anything that's ever lived before. Organic matter increases the microbial activity in soil, and that microbial activity is important to break down forms of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium that are available to plants. And also, organic matter has the additional advantage of helping hold nutrients and water in your soil. So a little bit more on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. If you look on a bag of fertilizer, by law, you'll see 3 numbers on there. The first number is always the percentage of nitrogen. The second number is always the percentage of phosphorus. And the third number is always the percentage of potassium. So we'll start with nitrogen. Nitrogen is very important for lush leaves, but too much nitrogen can be as bad as too little nitrogen. If you over fertilize with nitrogen, you'll grow lots of leaves, but not many veggies. So that's another reason why to get a soil test so that we can make a precision fertilizer recommendation for you. Very important in Alaska is phosphorus. In particular, phosphorus is important for the development of roots because we have relatively cold soils compared to the rest of the country. It's very important that the root system gets well developed and developed soon. Plants in Alaska will typically need twice as much phosphorus as they do nitrogen. And then finally, potassium. Potassium is important in all aspects of plant growth, also in photosynthesis and in the development of a strong root system. It's also important for disease resistance. And again, you'll hear me say over and over, do a soil test, do a soil test. And that's so that we can give you a custom recommendation of what you need with these nutrients. Then there's what's called secondary nutrients. The nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium is typically needed in a semi-truckloads, relatively speaking. Secondary nutrients like calcium, sulfur, and magnesium are needed in what I call wheelbarrow loads. So that's a significantly lesser amount than a semi-truckload. Usually in Alaska, you don't need any more secondary nutrients than what's probably already present in the soil. But again, a soil test can make us absolutely sure of that. And then finally, there's micronutrients, and those are things like iron and zinc and boron and molybdenum. These are needed in such tiny amounts that they are needed in the equivalent of a teaspoon amount. And again, these micronutrients are very rarely deficient in the soil, but sometimes it does occur, and a soil test can tell us that. So here is my phone number. You can always reach me at the Matsu Copper River Valley Cooperative Extension Office. Our general number is 745-3360. If I'm out of my office, and this time of year, I'm out of my office quite a bit because the farmers are planting and they need help. But you can either talk to our receptionist or leave a message, and we will get back to you just as quickly as we can. This time of year, sometimes it can take me up to 2 days, 2 business days to get back to you just because of the sheer volume of numbers or calls we receive, but we will get back to you. If you don't hear from us within 2 days, okay, please call back because something happened. I know on my phone, my voicemail rewind button is right next to the delete button. And there's been times when I thought I was hitting rewind to re-listen to someone's phone number and I accidentally hit delete and it's gone forever. So we pride ourselves in getting back to people as quickly as possible. So if you don't hear from us, please contact us again. So I'm going to skip through a couple of these slides and just briefly talk about where we're at. Spring is here, but in most places in Alaska, the soil is still moist. It's been a particularly rough winter in Alaska this year, and people are anxious to get out in the garden, but it's important that you not get out in your garden too soon. If your soil is still water saturated and you get out and walk around on it and try to cultivate in it, you can compact the soil, and that's going to greatly reduce the production that you get. So what you can do is do a little test, get some soil in your hand. If you squeeze it in your hand and it forms a ribbon, it's still too wet, stay out of your garden. If you squeeze it in your hand and when you release it, it crumbles, the soil moisture is low enough that it's safe to get out in your garden without compacting it. And again, one of the best things that you can do for your soil is to mend with compost. We recommend that you put about 1 inch to 2 inches of compost in your garden per year and till it in. I'm not sure if AARP is having a session on composting. If not, I would be more than happy to do another session, Teresa, on how to quickly compost in Alaska. We have a program that can go from raw material to finished compost in 3 months. So, and if you don't have that scheduled, we would be happy to do one for you.
So Steve, we did that last year and we have that on our YouTube page. So I did want to just say for folks who are wondering, we're recording this and we will send out a link to the recording and the slides. And we'll include in that the link to the compost webinar from last year.
All right, thanks. So some other things you can do, a great way to get your plants going is to create what I call a kickstart solution. You can buy kickstart solutions in the garden stores, or you can make it yourself. A great way to make it yourself is if you've got a source of manure, say chicken manure or sheep manure, goat manure, cow manure, horse manure. These are all great. What you can do is take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it half full of the manure, and then fill it up to the top with water and let it sit for a week. Then the tea that you drain off of that is a fantastic starter solution that you didn't have to pay money for. So when you transplant your starts to the garden, or when you put your seeds in the garden, water them with that kickstart solution and they will do great. For people that have got plants that they started in their house or in their greenhouse, it's very important in Alaska that you harden them off. What that does is that prepares them for being outside, both in the cold, because here in another couple of weeks when people will move their starts outside, it'll still be cold at night. And if you've been having your plants inside your house in a sunny window or in a greenhouse, they're not used to that cold. Another thing they're not used to is wind. So, if you take them from a windless environment to an area that has even got a slight breeze, that's really going to slow their growth. And then the big one is they're probably not used to bright sunlight. So you can harden off your plants by putting them outside for a few hours a day and then bring them back in. Excuse me. Do that for about a week and they'll be hardened off and they're ready to go in your garden. And again, I don't know where you're at in Alaska, but here in South Central Alaska, usually about May 21st is when you can safely put them in your garden. So I would say start hardening them off about May 15th for South Central Alaska. Watering, believe it or not, watering is where a lot of people make mistakes with their plants. It's important to water infrequently but deeply. So that generally means water once a week, water about 1 to 1.5 inches of water in your garden. It's important for your garden to dry out a little bit because that will encourage root growth. People that go out and water their gardens every day, say they go out and they put like 1/8 of an inch of water on their garden, that greatly impacts the development of the roots. And then there's other people that water very deeply every day. That will greatly decrease the amount of vegetable production you'll get, particularly in tomatoes. Something to think about too is to use drip irrigation in your garden. Drip irrigation has the advantage of not getting the leaves wet. And anytime you can water your plants and not get the leaves wet, that's important because in Alaska, we're very susceptible to fungal diseases. And that usually gets started with wet vegetation. So we'll finish up with some of the insect problems we have in Alaska. Fortunately, we don't have many, but what we do have are very problematic, but they're relatively easy to control. The first one is cutworms, okay? If you look at the plant there, the picture in the lower right, a cutworm will crawl up from the soil and chew the plant in two. In this particular, I think it's a cabbage plant. Once it's chewed in two, the plant is dead and unusable. So what you can do to protect your plants is to put little collars around the base of the plants. With cutworms, I can't remember if it's a moth or a fly, but they come and they lay an egg at the base of the plant. And eventually that egg will develop into the larva, which will actually eventually damage the plant. If the moth or the fly can't land at the base of the plant to lay an egg, it will move on to another plant. Okay, so making these collars to go around your plant will prevent that kind of damage. Then there's root maggots. Root maggots, they attack cabbages, radishes, pretty much any of your root plants. Again, I can't remember if it's a moth or a fly that lays the egg, but the key is they lay the egg at the base of the plant. And if you prevent that moth or fly from laying that egg, they'll move on. And again, using collars will prevent that. The damage that root maggots cause to say like radishes, you can still eat a radish that's been damaged by a root maggot, but it doesn't have a very appealing look. And so a lot of people will just discard them. A big problem, obviously this is a fake picture I found, but I think it's kind of illustrates how we feel about slugs in Alaska. Certainly here in South Central Alaska and in Southeast Alaska, slugs have become a really big problem. They're a little more limited in the interior, but they're still a problem. Things you can do for slugs is you can create beer traps. This is where you place a cup at the soil level and fill it full of beer, or I should say fill it halfway with beer. The slugs are attracted to the smell of the yeast in it and they crawl into the cup and drown. You can space these cups out every foot or so, particularly if your garden faces a forest area or a lawn area where most of the slugs will be. As they come to your garden, they will be attracted to the beer traps, and you'll greatly reduce them. You can also put slug traps out in the form of a dark colored board or a dark colored shingle. Slugs will crawl under there for protection, and you can go out every day and handpick the slugs. Anything that has a rough surface on it will help prevent slugs. For example, sandpaper. Slugs don't like to crawl across sandpaper. And they also do not like to crawl across a copper barrier. In garden stores, you can buy thin copper strips with adhesive on the back that you can, say, put around the edge of your raised bed garden. And slugs, some slugs will crawl across it, but most slugs don't like the ionic sensation of it, or I should say the electrical current that creates, and they'll move on to something else. An important key to slugs is good sanitation. This fall, when you clean up your garden, get all of the dead vegetation out into a compost pile. Any place where a slug can hide, like dead vegetation, is by removing that, you'll just prevent a place for them to survive over the winter. And finally, here's my email. And I gave you the phone number before. That's to our main line. This number, 745-3639, is the direct line to my phone. If I'm not here or I'm on another line, you can always leave a message. And again, if you don't hear back from me in 2 days, something happened. Okay. I know if you send me an email, a lot of times this time of year, I'm traveling a lot, and say I'm on an airplane and I'm checking my email, and we hit a bump in the air and I accidentally hit the delete button and didn't even know it. Or as I said on my voicemail, my rewind button is right next to my delete button. And so sometimes I've accidentally hit it and I've lost your message. So my point is, if you don't hear from me in 2 days, even if it's just a message saying, I got your message and I'm working on the answer, please contact me again. So Teresa, I don't, for whatever reason, I can't see the, my cursor is not working. So if there's questions in the chat, you'll have to tell me what they are.
So Steve, I think the chat has been disabled. So if you stop share, then we can have people raise their hands. That's what we did last week. So for folks who don't know how to raise your hand, on the bottom, and sometimes it's on the top of your screen, there is some tools. There's chat, there's mute, stop video. Well, there's also reactions, which is a smiley face with a plus. If you click on that button, you will end up with, you can clap, you can raise your hand, you can do a thumbs up, but raise your hand. So if you would do a raise your hand, then we'll be able to see all the folks who have questions, and I'll call on you as your hand is raised. We have a couple people already, Steve, so I'm gonna call on Karen. Karen, will you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, this is great. Thank you, Steve. Quick question, how do you prevent your lettuce from bolting? Because we had that problem last year.
Okay, it's actually very easy to prevent your lettuce from bolting, and that's with shade cloth. The key to reducing bolting in lettuce is to reduce the temperature and to reduce the amount of sunlight they get. So you can buy tablecloth at the garden stores, or actually anything that will just reduce the amount of sun that the plant gets. So by reducing the sun, you'll reduce the temperature and no more bolting. So it's a pretty easy solution.
Thank you.
So Steve, do you put the cloth over the lettuce? Do you make like a, how do you use the shade cloth?
Okay, well, what you can do, I prefer to put the shade cloth on the west side of the plant to reduce the afternoon sun. Typically, the morning sun is going to be the cool time of day. So if you just took a couple of posts and say you took black plastic and say you put it up maybe 4 or 5 feet high to create an afternoon barrier to the sun, that'll greatly reduce the bolting.
Got it. And are there varieties that do better? Is that on that list?
I don't know that it talks about reducing bolting. I know I had a problem with bolting, and I moved all my leafy plants to my backyard where it gets morning and afternoon shade from the sun, and I've had no bolting problems. In fact, I grow giant cabbages that way for the Alaska State Fair, and if I didn't have them shaded a little bit, they would bolt before the fair occurred, and I wouldn't be able to enter them.
All right, great. Next up is Kate and Daryl. If you unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I had a question about the collars. What do you make the collars out of for the cutworms and everything?
You can make them out of anything. You can make them out of cardboard. The best, if you have a source of waxed cardboard, like fruit comes in, but I've made them out of plastic sheeting. Really, it's anything. Cardboard is probably the cheapest, but cardboard won't last too many rains or too many waterings. So on mine, I've taken old, actually what I've done is I've taken little plastic soda pop bottles, and I've cut the body off of it, and then I cut a slit up the side, and then I stick the plant out of the top of the bottle, and that protects it from the insects, but it also acts as a miniature greenhouse for the plant. And there's probably no shortage of plastic bottles out there that you can do that to.
Oh, that's a great idea. I was going to say, we actually grow our lettuce in barrels out on the north side of our house, and it does great.
Yeah, and that's a great example, because growing it on the north side will lower the amount of sun that it raises. So, people say, oh, I have to have southern exposure. I have to have southern exposure. Well, there's advantages to northern exposure too.
Right? Yeah, I just step out my front door and gather lettuce for the salad that night and everything. It's awesome. Anyway, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Oh, glad to. That's what we're here for.
So, and for folks who haven't seen, if you click on the chat button, I have put a link to next week's webinar, which is on love to garden, but aches and pains getting in the way. And that's going to be with Art Nash. And then below that, if you go to www.aarp.org/AK, that'll take you to our webpage. And if you go to the webpage and you look for gardening's webinar series, you can see the recordings of all the previous weeks. This is our 5th today. So we will also send out that email. It may not come out tomorrow, but hopefully by Friday, it'll have a link to this recording and a link to the YouTube on how to compost. All right, next up we have Sherry Douglas.
Hi, this has been really helpful. Just a quick question. I have a very cute standing, it's an old gold mining dredge that my husband created for a planter, but it's pretty narrow. And the first year it did really great. Last year I didn't have much luck there. And I'm wondering if is there some dimension that's too narrow for a good garden box? Because you mentioned 12 inches. This is probably more like 4 or 5 inches deep.
Well, 4 or 5 inches should be just fine. Ideally, you'd have 6 inches, but I think you can get by with that. What's the width of it?
It's probably like 6 feet. Well, it's 6 feet by 3 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that should be fine. What I suspect happened is you just depleted the nutrients If you're not able to take a soil test, what I would recommend is 6 pounds per 100 square feet of 832-16 fertilizer. In the absence of a soil test, the 6 pounds per 100 square feet of 832-16 is the best scientific guess for what your garden needs.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, and we have another question from Dana.
Hi, thanks for the talk, Steve. I saw under the pest, you did not talk about voles.
Oh, well, I'll be happy to talk about voles. That seems to be a perennial problem all over the state. A couple of things you can do about voles. Depending, I'm assuming you're having problems with your trees, your fruit trees, Dana?
No, I live up in North Pole, and I was growing next to my deck, and first year was great. Second year, the voles took everything. So I moved to containers, but I would still like to grow on the ground, but the voles come up from underneath and grab them.
Well, the best thing you can do for voles is to prevent anything that provides them cover. If you can create, about a foot of exposed soil, that'll help reduce the voles, because as you probably noticed, the voles create little tunnels under the vegetation, and that's how they protect themselves from predators. It may not be practical in your case, but the best vole prevention is a cat. I know I have a cat every morning in the summertime presents me with the night's catch, and she brings them, puts them up on the porch, and it's kind of gross, but I appreciate the good work she's doing protecting my gardens.
All right, next up is Barb.
Hello. Hi, Steve. You responded to my email a few weeks ago about my soil test. So thank you so much for your prompt response on that. So I have a twofold question. I've been gardening for over 20 years, and recently I heard that there are determinate and indeterminate potatoes, not tomatoes. A, is that really a thing? And B, do we need to be concerned about that when we're planting potatoes in Alaska?
I have never heard that before. All potatoes that I'm aware of are what I would consider determinate. That means that they, flower at the same time, and what we're really concerned with is producing the roots. Now it could be, well, actually, Barb, that's a really great question, because you just made me think. The way we grow potatoes is the seeds that we use are actual tubers that we've gotten from the previous year, and we take those potatoes and we plant them in the ground, and we call them seeds. Well, they're not actually seeds, it's actually plant division. So potatoes, they actually do produce seeds like we normally think of seeds. So if you go out in your potato patch and you see those flowers, okay, those will eventually become seeds. So I could see how there might be varieties of potatoes that all flower at once and then they're done. And there might be some varieties of potatoes that flower all summer long. So the ones that flower at once would be determinate, and the ones that flower all summer long would be indeterminate. I'm not sure what the advantage would be, because most people don't start potatoes from the actual seed. But that could be a fun thing to experiment with.
All right, next up is Karen again.
Yes, thank you. Seriously, we do have a problem. And Steve, it's interesting that you mentioned this as a solution to the vole problem, but we seriously have a problem with feral cats who go to our gardens and our flower beds, our vegetable gardens. They poop in them. We can't keep them out. It is just do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, there is something you can do. You can get motion sensing water sprinklers. They're very effective against cats. Actually, they're very effective against moose too. So you hook them up to your water hose, and they're battery operated. I believe it works off infrared, and when they detect motion, they come on and they give a short burst, and very effective and fun too. So,
All right, we have a question from Nadine.
Thank you. I've been reading lately about companion planting, such as marigolds with tomatoes. Can you speak to that briefly?
yep, it's very effective. I do that in my raised bed gardens along the edges. I'll plant marigolds, and it's an insect deterrent. If you Google that on the internet, you can find other companion plants. It's more, companion planting is more than just reducing insects. There's some plants that do well with each other. For example, some people will plant radishes in between, say, their cauliflower plants, because the radishes don't need a lot of space, but the cauliflower does. And so the radishes fill those smaller spaces that the cauliflower can't use. That's companion planting is a huge topic. And if you do a Google search for it, you'll find a whole wealth of information out there. But again, I do it primarily with marigolds to keep down the insects.
Steve, I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Matt. I have a question for you. So I have had the same garden for many, many years, always grown carrots and lettuce and peas and all that kind of stuff. In the last few years, the carrots have been like very wonky shaped. And I'm wondering if that is a nutrient issue.
Yeah, if it's the same soil you've always had, and you had good looking carrots before, and all of a sudden, they're misshapen now, that's almost certainly a nutrient issue.
Okay, that's very helpful. And then I've also heard for slugs, if you put crunched eggshells around your plants, does that work or does it not work?
Well, let's just say this: if it works for you, do it. The problem with eggshells, they can actually act as an attractant to slugs. That little membrane on the inside of the shell, if you don't remove that completely, slugs love that. And the only way to remove that is to actually dry them out well in the stove. Okay. And then you have to crush them up in a very, very finely. And the theory is the slugs don't want to crawl across the rough surface. Just last night, we had a lecture by an integrated pest management specialist at UAF, and he was asked that very same question. And his response was, for the most part, if a slug doesn't have to crawl across eggshells, they're not. But on the other hand, if there's something really tasty that they want to get to, like a cabbage, it's like, okay, I'll rough it and go for it. The best thing for slugs is a combination of beer traps and Sluggo. Sluggo is a pretty safe. It's not organic, but it's almost organic material. And what it does is it messes up the slug's ability to produce slime. And without slime, the slugs are dead.
All right. Well, we don't have any more questions and we're just at the hour. So I just want to encourage anyone who wants to come to next week's webinar. As Nadine said earlier today, we're also hosting a webinar series on technology starting on Friday. So if you go to our website, aarp.org/AK, you'll be able to sign up for those technology webinars. It's Zoom, streaming TVs, how to protect your information online. There's 6 webinars in a row. And we're also, I put into the chat, we're also looking for volunteers who want us to help us plan upcoming webinars. So if you have topics of interest or things that you would like to see or speakers you'd like to hear, send me an email at tholt@aarp.org. Otherwise, thank you, Stephen. This was so informative. I've been gardening for many years and I learned lots today. So thank you again.
Thanks for hosting it, Teresa, and sorry about the technical problems in the beginning. So,
That's all right.
all right, we'll
All right,
see you
thank you
later.
all. Look for your email.